Taboo Talk. That's not the name of the show. It's Together We Serve. But we're going to talk about something that's taboo that it shouldn't be. Men's sexual health and sexual health altogether. Yeah, I said it. I said sex. I said the word. It's just a word. It's part of life. It's part of eating. It's part of drinking. It's part of sleeping. My guest is going to rock your world. I love this guy. I've only known him for probably 3 or 4 weeks, but as I always say, people become close to me, they're like a brother from another mother. We're going to talk about some things that really could change people's lives in a simple, educational, inspiring, motivation way. And that's what I love to have my guest. And let's bring him on. Jesse Poppick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. Pleasure to be here.
This is so great. Let's jump into it. What the heck is sexual health?
That is a really good question, Steve. And it's a question that I think if I asked you and 5 other people, men and women, I'd probably get at least 5 different answers. So what is sexual health? Generally, I imagine if I were to ask you that question, one might think I'm talking about clinical health, going into a health clinic, going to see a doctor, some kind of physiological association with your sexuality or your physical body. And that's part of sexual health for sure. Sexual health is also mental health. And I really appreciate the timing of being on your show this week, Steve, because I'm pretty sure May is Mental Health Month. And so sexual health encompasses a whole lot more than just the physiological well-being of our person, of our bodies. Sexual health, from where I sit, actually encompasses a lot of mental health and a lot of physical health. It is really, I think, easily discovered, meaning you can discover your own sexual health through really 6 principles of sexual health that I have been studying for the past few years. And they're pretty basic. They're pretty straightforward. I think, as you said when you opened the show, this is a taboo topic. And I don't want it to be a taboo topic. I imagine that sexual health, both mentally and physically, should be as easy to talk about as anything having to do with our health. Going to the doctor, people go get regular checkups. People talk about this, and I know physical health and going to see doctors can certainly be sensitive. And I'm not to suggest that sexual health isn't a sensitive topic. However, I think it should be a lot more normalized. As you pointed out at the beginning of the show as well, I don't think any of us would be here if it was not for the physical act of sex. Pretty sure that's the case for most of us. I think there are some IVF is an amazing process, and many babies come from IVF. But certainly the fact that we create a taboo around a physical act that actually we almost all take part in at some point or another, and none of us would be here without, I find amazing. And as someone who struggled, quite honestly, Steve, with my own sexual health and not understanding what it was, like, what the hell is sexual health? Like, how do we define that? I struggled for a long time. And these 6 principles of sexual health that I found allow me, as I said, to kind of gauge my own sexual health against this, list, if you will, of 6 principles. A very smart guy, Doug Braun Harvey, put together these 6 principles, and he uses them to help talk about sexuality, to help break barriers with therapists talking to kids, and in the workplace talking about sexual health. And they're pretty straightforward. These principles actually, I think, are broader than just our sexual health. And the 6 principles are pretty straightforward. I'll tell you what they are. First one is consent. I think we're all pretty aware of what consent is about, but we'll talk more about that as we move forward, I'm sure. Consent, non-exploitation, honesty, shared values, protection from sexually transmitted infections and unwanted pregnancies, and finally, pleasure. So if I consider how healthy am I sexually, I can look to see, are my sexual interactions, are they happening with consent? Am I consenting? Are my partners consenting? If so, I can check that box. Is anyone being exploited in this situation? Hopefully not. And if not, check that box. Are we all being honest? Is everyone who's participating in this being honest with themselves and with their partners? Do we share the same values? I think a lot of people, when they get into sexy time, sometimes it doesn't work, and maybe it's because you actually don't find the same things sexy. So figuring out if you have shared values or not. Protection. This, I think, goes more towards the physiological, clinical definition of sexual health that I think many of us fall into. Is like, I have to get tested, I'm going to go to the doctor. And so that protection piece, I think, falls more into that clinical approach. But the rest of these 6 principles are equally as important, I would say, as making sure our bodies are healthy. And lastly is pleasure. And I feel like, having grown up here in the United States of America, and maybe you agree, we're sex sells in this country. We're all about it, but we're also super repressed about it. We don't want to talk about it. Again, the idea that sexual health is taboo. The United States of America is very funny because we love our Sports Illustrated covers and we love sexy stuff. But if it goes too far or beyond even too far, like we can't have these conversations without feeling maybe a little uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I, for one, want us to get over that.
Yeah. And why do you think it's taboo? This might be a tough question to answer. I know you've done research and maybe there's no direct answer, but why has it become taboo?
Well, I mean, certainly in the political climate we have going on right now today, there's a lot of topics, not just sexual health, that seem to be more taboo than ever before, which strikes me. And I think, look, let's go back to the root cause. The original settlers from Europe, for this country, were Puritans. So we do have a bit of a Puritan heritage. The Judeo-Christian heritage of our country, for the most part, also. There's a lot of guilt and shame around sex and sexuality and talking about this stuff. There's clearly a lack of really good sex education, of comprehensive sex education in this country. For being one of the wealthiest countries in the world, the fact that we can't afford or don't want to put any energy or money towards educating ourselves about, again, a pretty basic function is pretty surprising. And I think a lot of it is held back because of moralistic views that many people hold that are probably attached to religious views and upbringing, that this is not something that we talk about in public. We barely talk about it even in private. And I feel like my purpose here to serve is to break down some barriers, break down some walls, and create a situation where it's okay to talk about sexuality and sexual health. Yeah. That's really what it's about for me.
And it's interesting because to me, sexual health is like nutrition, like we were talking before the show. We need it. Water. Are you drinking another water? Not that you need to have sex all the time, but it's a part of everybody's life. We're not going to fly airplanes. We're not going to be pilots, but we decide to be entrepreneurs. Some other people might be plumbers. That's where you can choose. This is part of our DNA, right? And that's where you want to help people with.
Well, I certainly want people to get over their uncomfortableness or sit with their uncomfortableness so that being uncomfortable becomes slightly more comfortable. But also, just break down the idea that that something that's so basic to our human existence is something that we shy away from talking about. And I know this is not the only topic that's true for us human beings. And I, for one, based on my own struggles, as I said, with sexual health and not really understanding what it meant for me, and then becoming more and more clear about it as I moved later into my life. I think it's an important mission for me to, again, talk about this in a way that other people become intrigued, other people want to ask questions and become curious about, what the hell is this guy talking about? And I find that there's one camp of people who never want to talk about sex or sexuality. That's fine. They never will. And that's fine. And then there are probably a lot more people I have found who might be reluctant at first to speak about sex or sexuality, but then you open them up and they don't shut up. There are people, if they're given the opportunity and they're made to feel safe, they really do open up and they really do end up talking about issues they might be having or good times they might be having. People do enjoy talking about it. It's just crossing that bridge to, is it safe, right? Is it safe for me to talk about this?
Oh, did I say sex? Oh, I didn't mean sex.
Whoops.
What's interesting, and Jesse, what you taught me when you're on my podcast and us having discussions, which I thank you for, is you don't eat well, you're going to get obese, possibly be unhealthy, and possibly die. Well, the same thing with sexual health. I told you the story. The guy's 28 years old. He's got 9 children from 9 different women. Now, he's not going to die, but his life is going to be completely different. Where if maybe he was educated before, maybe he only has 2 kids, or maybe he doesn't have any. Talk about that and what the education could be, I guess, the ROI.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, this is a young man who has all these kids, and the protection piece of the 6 principles of sexual health may have been overlooked. I have 3 children of my own, and I also struggled with the protection piece occasionally when I was certainly in my early 20s and late 20s as well. But yeah, I think that if people are exposed to this information, and it's more normalized to talk about, say, protection against sexually transmitted diseases, or protection against unwanted pregnancies. Certainly, the word abortion is a hot button issue. As I said, there are many, many issues right now in the U.S. that seem to be particularly, I want to say toxic, but certainly like hot button issues. Abortion is one of them. One way to avoid abortions is to actually use protection to avoid unwanted pregnancies beforehand. Contraception is a huge part of that. Contraception doesn't just have to be women taking the pill. The most effective contraception outside of the pill, which again relies on a woman doing something, is condoms and prophylactics. Condoms are 98% or 99.8% effective if they're used, and they're preventative for not just pregnancies but also diseases. Or I could say it the other way: they prevent diseases and pregnancies, and that in and of itself, look, I'm a man, I'm a straight guy, and I enjoy having sex with women. And if I could choose to not have to wear a condom, I would. But I also know that from a practical standpoint, again, unless I know your history, unless I know your background, I probably am going to be choosing protection both for you and for me. I don't want to contract anything from you. I don't want to get you pregnant. And so as a responsible man, as a strong, responsible man, I am going to remember that principle of sexual health and say, how healthy am I being? Well, if I'm protecting me and my partner against unwanted pregnancies and against certainly unwanted diseases, I'm probably being a responsible and healthy guy.
And I like this because it's the education part of hearing it over and over. It doesn't hit the first time. Obviously, with this guy, I'm sure he was talked about condoms. I'm sure he's heard that somebody from a friend or school or whatever, but he still went down this route. I'm so excited for you to talk about this, your workshops. You do these great workshops. I want all of you men to jump on this thing if you can. Talk about what you do at the workshop and when it is.
Sure. So first of all, the workshops are a 6-week course. They're open to anyone. Anyone can join my workshops or my weekly calls. I do encourage men, though, to step in outside of their comfort zone. And the 6-week workshop works like this. In week 1, we build a safe container. It's all virtual, and I aim to create a space where, after some consent is given, we actually talk about each of the 6 principles. The first principle being consent, and I think I'll go into consent in a minute. But basically, what happens then for the next 6 weeks, we talk about each one of the 6 principles, and we go into depth on each one. I think from a guy's perspective, we like to do stuff. We want to take action. We're generally, tell us what to do, we'll do it. And what I'm trying to associate with each of these 6 principles is to get away from theory and move into more practice. Like, what can we practically do as men to practice consent, to practice non-exploitation, to practice honesty? All 6 principles there's actions that we can take as men to benefit ourselves, create a situation where our sexual health is good, and our sexual health also in a positive way can impact our partner or partners. Consent is a fantastic one. Consent is more than just asking permission. And it's funny, getting ready for our show today, Steve, I was thinking this morning a bit about consent. And, I was thinking about the times where I've been in a situation where kissing someone for the first time was happening, and I didn't ask, and the other person didn't ask me. It just was a feeling, and it felt right, and a first kiss happened. And I was thinking, like, well, if that situation was different, how could you make asking for consent there sexy? How could you make that like a sexy kind of thing to do? Can I kiss you? Is it okay if I kiss you? Like, there is a moment where if there's any hesitation, like, you can, as a man, speak softly and ask permission in a way that, might actually be a turn on for your partner. Certainly, I think if you have, I don't want to say if you have to ask for consent, then the vibe's not there. And I think it's always important to ask. So even after maybe a first kiss has happened, you can also say, hey, is it okay that we just did that? Is it okay that we just kissed? That's consent 101, right? In the workshops, we move beyond 101. We get into actually like, what is consent actually about? And I talk a lot about an incredible influence on me, Betty Martin. BettyMartin.org is her website, and she is a therapist, a sex therapist, and she actually has created something called the Wheel of Consent. And the Wheel of Consent is something that I've studied. I've done some workshops around the Wheel of Consent, and highly recommend your entire audience to go check out BettyMartin.org. She actually wrote a book about the Wheel of Consent. On the website, you can download this game, the 3-minute game. This is a little folded. If I unfold this, it'll give you all the directions. There's the Wheel of Consent. This game is something that you can practically do. Like, this is actually an action that you can take with a partner. And you get to explore like beyond just asking for consent, because consent really implies that everyone understands what they're doing and why they're doing it. And what this game allows you to question is, I've given you consent to kiss me, and who am I doing that for? Like, who am I giving that consent for? Is it because I want this? Is it because you want this? And the 4 quadrants of the circle of consent, of the Wheel of Consent, allow you to figure out who's doing what for whom, and figure out why. Like, a lot of us have a history of being people pleasers and maybe saying yes to things that we actually want to say no to, or vice versa, saying no to things we want to say yes to. And this game really interestingly allows you to explore that. And we get into the Wheel of Consent and playing this game in the first week of the workshop. So each week we get into each of the 6 principles, and we get into a practical application that we as men and we as human beings can take to practice these principles and be mindful of them. And again, use them as a guide. These are not rules that I'm not trying to be a dictator here. These principles have helped guide me to be more healthy sexually, and I just want to spread the word. I want to be the Pied Piper of the 6 principles of sexual health.
Well, I love that. Communication, penis, dick, vagina, pussy, jerking off. These are words that I'm saying it, and look, give me a little cringe, but they're just words in the dictionary. I believe they're all in the dictionary. They're vocabulary that's in our language. Why is it so hard, even now, for me to say those, to feel like I'm offending anybody? Because I'm really not offending anybody at all. Talk about language.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about communication, because I will say this, that none of these principles of sexual health are worth anything if there's not some level of commitment to communicate. Each one of these require communication, right? Consent obviously requires communication, some discussion, some level even of a shallow discussion around consent, and then obviously perhaps an opportunity to dive more deeply into consent. Requires communication, non-exploitation, talking about our situation, talking about us as partners. And is there the exploitation piece opens up a whole nother can of worms about sex work and sex workers and who's being exploited. Honesty, we can't be honest if we're not we can't really be honest if we're not good communicators. And even though I consider myself to be and have been a very good communicator, I was still withholding a lot of stuff from ex-partners, a lot of my own activities, again, that I was ashamed of. And so my ability to be honest was hampered. And a lot of that was some of that was certainly due to my lack of communication. Shared values. If I'm unable to tell you what it is I like or what it is I want, and you're equally unable to tell me, then we're not going to be on the same page necessarily about what values we share sexually. So the shared values piece absolutely requires communication, and probably also a piece of like knowing yourself, right? In order for me to understand what your shared values are, or for me to share with you what mine are, I have to know what they are, right? So some introspection around these principles is probably required as well. The protection piece also probably requires some communication. Hey, are you going to put a condom on now, or like, what's the deal with that? What kind of and what are we using for contraception if not that? There's far more to contraception than the pill for women and condoms for men. Trust me, there's quite a few more. And in the book that I'm putting together, the handbook for sexual health around these principles, I created an incredible list. I did a lot of research around what's available beyond condoms and the pill, and you'd be surprised. And I reveal a lot of that in the book. And this was an education for me to even understand actually how many options are out there for contraception. Many of them prevent pregnancies or diseases. Not all contraception prevent both, and it requires some research. And again, I put together some of the research for you in the book, which I'm excited to share. And then pleasure too. If we're going to communicate, we got to be able to talk about, again, what do I like? What do you like? Communication is really important.
It's powerful. Let's throw society in there, the society influence. We talked and jump in the media, because all those words I said is because the media glorifies sexuality. You said Sports Illustrated. We have to rate our movies because of sex. And I understand there's young kids that want to see this. They're not ready because they're not educated. But talk about society's influence.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, right? I mean, again, I think there's a lot of fear and shame around sex and sexuality. And I think that probably is the barrier to a lot of these discussions actually happening. I think that a lot of moralism that's thrown on this guilt and fear around sex and sexuality sadly does come from a lot from religious background. A lot of people with religious backgrounds really, really struggle with their sexuality. There's some cognitive dissonance that can happen around, your physical body and the biological demands that we put on ourselves versus the things we learn and the things we're told and taught about what's right and what's wrong. And sometimes those two things conflict. And that creation of conflict in people can be really a hard struggle, really, really hard struggle. The lack of education, though, in general, I think is, sadly, an underpinning of a lot of pregnancies, of people like the guy you were talking about who had multiple pregnancies unwanted. Perhaps maybe he wanted them all. I don't know if he wants to be Nick Cannon Jr. The fact, though, is that, a comprehensive sex education program in this country would benefit everyone. It really would. It would benefit everyone understanding and becoming a little bit more comfortable with their bodies, how our bodies work, and how we all got here. And the inability for us to actually come around and agree that this is an important thing for us all to be educated about is a problem. We have 50 states united. I think the number is less than 25 actually have a state mandate for any kind of sex education at all. So less than half. And of those, I think it's 18, only 18 require the sex education to be medically accurate. That boggles my mind.
It's amazing.
Kudos for the state for saying, okay, we'll have sex education, but reverse kudos for the state to say we can have sex education, but it doesn't have to be scientifically or medically accurate. What? Like,
talk about miseducation. I mean, it's hello.
Oh my goodness, talking about miseducation. And we're talking about miseducation for our basic human existence, like our simple biology. Like, how can we not want that to be correct? I mean, good Lord. I mean, like, seriously, like this is where, again, sexual health, as I said at the top of the show, right? Is it clinical? Is it physiological? Is it mental? I think it's all. But clearly, we want the physical and the biological part to be accurate, right? We making stuff up. I mean, we wouldn't allow MDs, we wouldn't allow doctors to go to medical school where the medical school doesn't have to be medically accurate. I mean, what are we doing?
Yeah, we learned our lessons with this misinformation with AIDS. I mean, how many people died of AIDS, like COVID? Some of these young people don't remember that, but yeah, miseducation was a big part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, and tied around fear and shame from from being reluctant to talk about sexuality. And in this case, certainly in the 80s, as a kid of the 80s, like because many of the people who were getting AIDS and HIV were gay. We couldn't talk about it because it was sexual, and we certainly couldn't talk about it because it was the gay disease, which is total bullshit. I mean, it's any living human can get AIDS. But again, the misinformation in the 80s was that it was the gay disease. Horrible.
I love your attitude. This is it should be a tough subject. It is, but you make it simple. And I love talking to you about this. So let's do this. Let's take a break because you've been doing a lot of talking. I want Jesse to get some water. You guys take a break. We'll be back in 2 or 3 minutes or so.
Great.
And we'll come back. A little blues to light up your Memorial weekend on Friday here, May 24th. Love a little blues. I'm not a big music guy, but I'm liking this blues stuff. You know what? And I'm not relating it to Taboo of sexual health. We don't want blues with that. You've listened to Jesse for the last 20, 22 minutes. The power of education. But the power of education is something people don't want to talk about. That's a tough thing, and Jesse walks us through this landscape so well. I'm excited. I mean, I said some words on the show that feel like, oh my God, he said those words. But it's okay. It's our body. It's what we have. It's what we are. And education is so important. Let me bring Jesse back on. Jesse, let's stop a little blues. get us all relaxed for Memorial Weekend. Here's a question. Why is sexual health different than sexual well-being, or is it the same?
That is a great question. So, in my studies, so I'm a board certified sexologist. I have a couple of certifications around sexual health and problem sexual behaviors. And the definition of a lot of this stuff is elusive. I'm not a licensed sex therapist, but even to licensed sex therapists, the definition of what sexual health is can be elusive. The World Health Organization has a definition. The CDC has a slightly different definition. If you go to the internet and Google what is sexual health, or even what is sexual well-being, you'll get a variety of different answers. And I think the easiest way for me to think about it is sexual health encompasses both my physical and mental sexual health. Sexual well-being probably has more to do with the mental side of that. My well-being, am I happy? Am I satisfied? Has less to do with the physical, or as I said before, in the first part of the show, sort of the clinical, physiological part. The well-being has more to do with my internal happiness, my internal well-being, and sexual health includes that. Again, if you go to the internet and you look up what is sexual health, you'll get a variety of different answers. To me, the principles that I've talked about before that Doug Braun-Harvey put together and has used in really incredibly applicable ways. He's a California-based therapist, and he has done some remarkable work with people, basically allowing people to talk about sexual health and ask these questions in a very safe and practical way that I think does a really good job of encompassing both that mental piece, so the well-being part, and the clinical or physiological part. These 6 principles kind of check all the boxes, if you will, for covering all of these aspects. And again, we talked about it before, and I'll just say it again. Communication is a really important part. I can guarantee you that your sexual health won't be great if you are unwilling or unable to communicate effectively with your partners or even with yourself. A lot of this stuff has to do with how honest you can be, not only with the people that you might be engaging with sexually, but also with yourself.
Yeah, that's really good. It's so well said. Again, you make it sound so simple, and it is.
Well, it is and it isn't. It is and it isn't.
No, it's true.
Look, we create moralisms for ourselves, Steve. You know that, like the shame and the fear of judgment of my partner will think I'm a weirdo if I like to, do weird things. Like I judge myself as doing weird things, so my partner, like all of this stuff, like we make a lot of this up in our heads. We don't actually, and because we make these stories up in our head, we don't communicate effectively. We don't ask the questions of like, hey, can I tell you this thing that I'm afraid you'll think is weird? We withhold that, right? And that can be a problem.
No, mindset's a big part of this. That's why education leads to the mindset. Like, hey, ask and make your decision from there. Like, hey, there's something that may be taboo for you, maybe not, but you don't know until you ask in the communication.
Look, I think a lot of this has to do with normalization. So the education around all of this allows us all to feel more comfortable and feel more normal about talking about sex and sexuality. I was on a different podcast recently, and I made the comparison to alcoholism. So alcoholism was shunned for a very long time in this country, and Lord knows if we're a country of nothing, we're a country full of alcoholics. We certainly love our alcohol. But so think about that. So something as mainstream as alcohol consumption, which our country, has a long history with, alcoholism was in the shadow. And I would say sometime in the 70s or 80s, it started to move more towards the mainstream. You saw people in movies and TV shows and characters who were addressing alcohol addiction and going to AA. And suddenly, I think in our lifetime, Steve, like the idea of talking about alcoholics and alcoholism is just a normal everyday thing. It's become accepted as through education and over time is like, yeah, this is real and it doesn't have to be in the shadow anymore. And I think for us, for many people in the United States, the sexuality piece is still in that shadow. Okay? And I want to bring it more and more out and into the mainstream and make it more normal. Relationship styles like polyamory and non-monogamy. You said penis, vagina, cock, pussy, masturbation, jerking off. These are all taboo words. polyamory, non-monogamy. I mean, this has less to do with sexual health, although I mean it's relationship health. And certainly, if you're in a non-monogamous relationship, sexual health ought to play a very serious role in that. But those types of relationship structures are also, relatively new in a mainstream sort of way. Always on the outskirts, always in the shadow. Certainly, the idea of having many wives or many husbands is not a new idea. But having it be so open and having it mainstream television shows where you have polyamorous couples and even swinging and all of this is, it is becoming in some ways easier to find this information, but still having these conversations is pretty still on the front. It really is.
It's not common. It's not common at all.
No.
So interesting. I learned on the podcast is STI testing in Europe is so much harder than in America, which usually it's reverse with things. America's maybe too free, or like I'll use privacy with websites. You got to be approved in Europe to use a website, and it's got to be ADA compliant and all that. We're here, we just have millions of websites. Why is that the case in Europe, the STI testing? I think that'd be a problem.
Yeah, I don't know. We did talk about this on the podcast, and my experience with friends of mine who live in Europe who have shared their experiences with getting tested there is I think there's an expense to it. If not, even in with it being free in certain European countries, there's a lot of social stigma. People get questioned in the doctor's office about why they're getting tested. Again, I want to believe that here in the U.S. we've been only fed a steady diet of European liberalism, and everything is free, and sexuality is free, and no one would question behaviors. There's a lot of sex work in many countries is legal, so it seems progressive in many, many ways. The practical application, though, it turns out, again, my sample size is relatively small. I've probably talked to about 20 people about this who live in Europe. There are a lot of barriers, social barriers that have been created to have STI testing in Europe become very challenging, which I find surprising because here in New York City, where I am, there certainly are many clinics and doctors I could go to. And I happen to sometimes go to City MD, and I do get tested regularly, and I've never been asked any questions ever. And usually the testing is free or close to free. So I find that to be a more progressive stance here in the U.S. than I would have thought. And it's also something that, again, speaking of education, Steve, I mean, people need to know that they have options here in the U.S. and that there are a variety of tests available to them, and in many cases will be free, whether or not you have insurance. Testing is, if you're going to be non-monogamous, if you're going to be practicing unsafe sex, unprotected sex, I would certainly recommend strongly that people get tested regularly. I was in the swinging community for many, many years, and getting tested regularly just became, again, a normal, everyday type of activity that my partners and I participated in. And it was expected as much with other partners. It's funny, having spent time in that scene, I found out most of the time that consent was always considered, that the aggressiveness, especially when it came to straight heterosexual interactions, that respect given to women by men in that scene, in my experience, was always really exemplary. No meant no, and people respected that, and consent was always a piece of that scene. Testing was always accepted and encouraged and expected. And it's funny to me that, again, this sort of fringy social scene is adopting methods and methodologies and expectations that I wish the rest of society would accept. Even in monogamous relationships, getting tested isn't necessarily an unheard of thing. It sounds a little strange. Why would you be tested for sexually transmitted diseases if you're in a monogamous relationship? And that does raise the question: why would you? Sexual health can encompass a lot, and it doesn't hurt necessarily to be tested, perhaps even after getting involved in a monogamous relationship, for infections that you might have received before you got into that monogamous relationship. Some of these insidious infections can linger for quite a while. I think there's what is it? Genital warts, I think, is like the most widespread sexually transmitted disease. I think like almost everyone has it. And certainly getting tested for it, even if you're in a monogamous relationship, might be a good idea. It's certainly the implication health-wise, physiologically, for women in particular, can lead to potential cancer, cervical cancer. So, just because you're in a monogamous relationship doesn't mean that you ought not get tested for certain infections that, again, you might have picked up beforehand.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Great. I forget the disclaimer, not a disclaimer, but great thought. There's something else came in my head. I can't think of it.
It's advice that no one asked for that I'm giving.
There you go. That's exactly
You've given me a soapbox, Steve, so I'm going to stand on my soapbox here.
I love it. No, this is great information. The other thing that comes to my head is, how does sexual health balance with your overall health?
That's a really great question. And again, I'm pretty sure May is Mental Health Month. And so the idea that sexual health is only about your physiological health, to me, is missing the mark. And your overall health, it's amazing to me. Having studied what I've been studying for the last few years, and studying with professional licensed therapists who are getting certifications to become sex therapists, or kink-aware therapists, or problem sexual behavior certified therapists. I mean, these are licensed therapists. There is an acknowledgement within the therapeutic and psychological field that people with PhDs, with master's degrees in therapy and in social work, the exposure that they have at the university level around sexual health is close to nil. It's close to nothing. There is an organization that I've worked with for years on my certifications called the Sexual Health Alliance. They are founded by professional licensed therapists, and they act as an organization to help therapists who want to include sexual health and sexuality, problem sexual behaviors as part of their practice. They help them get certified through ASAT, which is the certification body here in the US, because there's a lack of this type of specialization at the university level. That if you go to get a psychology degree at a high level, master's or PhD level, certainly at the PhD level, you'd have to choose what to study. But at a master's level, that there's a really gaping absence of sexuality-related psychology. That there's rarely a semester-long class offered. From my understanding of the therapists who I've spoken with, they might get exposed to it in a single class. So the idea that an organization like the Sexual Health Alliance exists is because there's a vacuum, and because there isn't in mainstream education for therapists the ability to dive more into the social, sexuality part of it, which to me, I find that hard to believe. It makes me kind of sad that a person can graduate with a degree in psychology and have spent very little time looking at or studying sexuality. Again, such an important part of our human existence, to not want to consider the psychological impacts of that and be able to study that just even for just a single semester seems like a disservice to those folks who are getting those types of degrees.
Let's get a little personal. Not that we didn't get personal in the last 40 minutes, but let's get Jesse personal.
Sure.
If you could interview one person, historical or today, what one person would you interview and why?
That is a great question. I think the person that just popped into my head, because hard to believe since we're talking about sexuality, is Dr. Ruth Westheimer. I think she still walks the earth. I think she's got to be like 90, right? I think she's, so not someone, she is an incredible woman. And like, again, what a cutting edge pusher of boundaries. I remember listening to her on the radio in the 80s. And she was talking about penises and vaginas, and she was like this little Jewish lady. And so how funny is that? Like that she was able to leverage her sweet little old lady acceptance in the world to be able to talk about these taboo topics. And she made quite a career of it. I'd be very interested to interview her, like for sure.
I would love to listen to that interview because I think she is impressive. So this is probably tied into our talk today, but what do you do on a Friday night?
That is a great question. Well, I'm here in New York City, and it just so happens that I have 3 daughters. 2 of them happen to be here in New York City. this evening, there is a show that I will plug because it's a show that I love and I've gone to many a time, called Stick a Pole in It, and it's a I think it happens at least 6 times a month at a club here in New York City called Drum, and it's a pole dancing and comedy show. And these two things don't happen at the same time. But this Friday, right now, tonight, you asked me, my daughters are going to go see this show because we know the producers of the show, and it's a fantastic show. The comics are top notch, like, hilarious, Comedy Central level comics, interspersed with professional athletes who are doing incredible acrobatics on a pole. It's not a strip club. It's a club that does physical pole dancing, like crazy tricks, and then followed by a comic, followed by pole dancing, followed by a comic. So, to answer your question, Steve, on a Friday night in New York City, May 24th, stick a pole in it. That's what I do.
What a great name. Somebody's pretty darn smart.
They are smart, okay. Those guys. Yeah,
it's that they really are. That just rolls off your tongue. Okay, I'm throwing you into a movie theater. What genre would you watch and which movie?
What genre would I watch and which movie? Well, I'm a sucker for sci-fi and action stuff. I will say that the Civil War movie that just came out, I haven't gone to see it, but I have an inkling. I have a draw to that. I have a draw to that for the political part, I guess for the action part. I imagine the reason I haven't seen it is because I'll probably get depressed.
Well, and that's the thing about movies. They're supposed to bring your emotions on. Sometimes it's just depressing.
A good movie ought to do that. Like, I guess if I walked out and I wasn't depressed, I'd think, what a piece of shit movie.
Yeah, I'm a big Mark Wahlberg fan in the movie about King, the dog, and King something. Very good movie. But my wife's looking at me and I'm tearing. I love dogs. And I won't tell if you haven't watched the movie, audience, but it's a great movie. You're going out to eat. It's a romantic dinner. Where would you want to take that date? What kind of food?
Well, French is easily romantic. However, I was saying this to actually my daughters just the other day, that the best French food I've ever had was in Cambodia. So I guess like the super romantic date would be to fly to Cambodia to eat French food.
Wow. There's French food in Cambodia. Now that's new for me.
Well, Cambodia was a French colony. And you know what they did to say F you to the French is they took the French food and they made it better than the French.
Let's move 100 years ahead. You're still alive. What would you tell yourself 100 years ahead in the future that you know today?
Woo! I've just began telling myself this, so I imagine I'd spend the next 100 years telling myself to slow down.
Great piece of advice. This is a microwave society world. We want to do things fast, the phone, this, that, doing dang, and crazy. We want to do sex fast. We want to do all that so
instant
fast.
Instant gratification.
Thank you. That's the crazy world. How can people get a hold of you?
So the website is easy, jessepoppick.com, JESSEPOPPICK.com. On that website, you'll find information about the weekly calls. So I do calls on Tuesdays and Thursdays to create that little 1 hour container to talk about the question, what is sexual health and sexual well-being? And anyone is welcome to join. I encourage men to join. Particularly, you can register for those calls on the website. I also have the 6-week course, which you'll also find information about on the website as well. I'm on Instagram at Jesse Poppick. I'm on TikTok at Jesse Poppick. It's all pretty easy, JESSEPOPPICK. That's the easiest way to find me.
Couple minutes left. Leave a final word for us.
Wow, the final word. So the final word around sexual health and well-being is, again, I want us all to feel more comfortable, maybe being slightly uncomfortable, and really understanding that sexual health has to do with our bodies, but it also has to do with our mental health, and that our well-being is also attached to our mental health, and to not dismiss the importance of what our sexual health means to us and to our partners, to our children, and to think about sexual health and well-being more holistically than, when someone talks about sexual health, they're asking me about my sex life, or they're asking me if I need to go to the doctor. Because that's a very small definition of what sexual health actually means. Sexual health includes sexual justice. It includes mental health. It includes physical health. So it's a bigger nut to crack, and it's not quite as simple as you're asking me about my sex life, or you're asking me if I ought to go to the doctor. So keep that in mind. If there's one takeaway about all of this is let's normalize this a little bit more. Let's make this easier to talk about, and let's also take this maybe a bit more seriously, and be curious. Really, if anything from this, Steve, what I'd love is that people just become more curious for themselves, whether or not they interact with me, about what is sexual health and well-being for them. Yeah,
that's fantastic. And a good starting point is the workshop, or just reach out to Jesse and ask questions. If you want to do it privately, that's the world's internet. Technologies allow us to do that. You can send an email, text, and be very anonymous if you need to be.
Sure.
But reach out. Help yourself. We're celebrating our veterans this weekend for Memorial Day weekend, and thank for all the people that served. God bless you, because you made America what it is today, so we can have these conversations.
Exactly. We are here having these conversations, and I really do appreciate that we're doing this right before Memorial Day weekend. Yeah. And that you mentioned that, because it's cliche, but people did die for our freedoms, and they do, and we're lucky to be here.
Yeah, amen. Next week, Michael DeLeon will be on. If you want to write a book, he's going to show you how to write a book, how to publish it, and how to be very successful with your book. So I'm excited for that episode. Me and Jesse want to thank you guys so much for watching this TV show, Together We Serve. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you were motivated, inspired, and I know you were educated. We'll see you at the next episode next week, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. Same bat channel, same bat time. See you guys.